1787. The gilded halls of Versailles glowed with candlelight, its endless mirrors reflecting the wealth and arrogance of France's monarchy. Yet, in the very heart of this palace, behind silk curtains and guarded whispers, a child was born who would never know peace. He was Louis-Joseph Xavier François, the Dauphin of France, the heir to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, a boy destined to inherit not just a throne, but a curse. But history remembers him not as a king. Instead, it remembers a trail of sickness, whispers of witchcraft, and a death so shrouded in doubt that even now, no one agrees on what truly happened. Tonight, we will walk through his short and haunted life, through the candle-lit corridors of Versailles, through prisons reeking of blood and mildew, through journals that should never have been written. Because the story of the cursed Dauphin is not one of royalty, but of horror. From the very moment of his birth, attendants whispered uneasily. The boy's eyes, too pale, too old, too knowing, stared back at midwives with a stillness that chilled even the hardened servants of the palace. Nurses swore that when he slept, he spoke, half-formed. Words, mutterings in a language none could understand. One nurse abandoned her post entirely after she claimed to hear him whisper her dead father's name. But what is a curse, if not something people see only when they want to? Was the Dauphin merely sickly? Or was something darker clinging to him before he could even walk? At first, the king and queen ignored these rumors. After all, France was drowning in political turmoil, bankruptcy, famine, whispers of revolution. A cursed child was the least of their worries, but within months, the infant Dauphin began to suffer sudden fevers that appeared and vanished like storms. Doctors applied leeches, bled him, prescribed potions of wine, mercury, and powdered pearls. Nothing worked. His cries echoed through Versailles, a haunting counterpoint to the music of royal balls. And then there were the dreams. The queen herself confided in letters that her boy woke screaming of shadows, pointing to corners of the room where no one stood. "He will not sleep unless I leave candles burning," she admitted. Even Marie Antoinette, proud, stubborn, unyielding, looked shaken. Some said the curse came from the people. That in the filth of Paris, starving peasants whispered spells against the royal family, cursing their children to rot before they could wear the crown. Others believed it came from within the palace itself. That courtiers, hungry for influence, poisoned the child slowly, keeping him weak, and a few, only a few, believed something even darker, that the boy had been chosen. Not for a throne, but for a fate far crueler. Because France in 1787 was about to drown in blood, and this child was born at the very edge of the abyss. In later years, one physician, Dr. Dessau, who examined the boy, confessed it was not merely sickness that clung to him, it was as if his body fought against life itself. His eyes, they held no warmth, only the look of one who has already seen his death. And yet, despite these words, the king and queen presented their boy to the public as healthy, radiant, and destined for greatness. Court painters brushed away his thinness, his pallor, his too long silences. Versailles demanded perfection, even as the boy's health rotted beneath silks and powdered wigs. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments below. And if you wish to continue exploring the shadows history tried to bury, subscribe to Cold Mysteries. Because each week we open another door the world has tried to keep locked, and trust me, you will want to see what comes next. But the curse of the Dauphin was only beginning, because soon the boy's strange illness would take a turn no doctor could explain, and Versailles, with all its wealth and power, would find itself powerless before the frailty of a single child. As the boy Dauphin grew past infancy, Versailles began to notice what the king and queen could no longer conceal: his frailty, his silence, and most of all, his strangeness. By the age of 2, Louis-Joseph was already too weak to stand for long. Tutors reported that lessons ended quickly because the child's hands trembled when holding even the smallest book. One governess confessed in her diary that his skin was unnaturally cold to the touch. "He does not feel like other children," she wrote. "Even in the heat of summer, when his chamber stifles, his skin is like marble. And when I lay him down to rest, he murmurs names of men who have not been in Versailles for years." Taikish, Palace began to whisper of consumption, of hereditary weakness, but others whispered something darker. That the boy was touched not by illness, but by forces the Church dared not name. The Dauphin's dreams became the terror of Versailles. On one winter night, attendants claimed he screamed for hours, insisting that the floor was covered in blood. No one else saw anything, but his cries carried down gilded corridors, through mirrored halls, and into the ears of servants who repeated the tale to Paris itself. And still stranger, some dreams seemed to come true. After one nightmare, where he whispered, "The stables will burn," flames broke out in the royal stables within the week. Coincidence or curse? When priests were called to bless his chambers, they left pale and silent, refusing to return. Marie Antoinette, already despised by the public as the Austrian woman, became desperate to shield her son from gossip. She carried him into public appearances, parading him through Versailles gardens, insisting he was merely shy. Painters made him radiant, cherubic, glowing with life. But behind closed doors, even the Queen could not deny the growing terror. In a letter to her sister, she confessed, "He stares into corners as though seeing what none of us can. At times I feel he does not look at me, but through me." The Queen feared ridicule, yes, but she also feared something far worse, that her boy was truly cursed. For every night she demanded candles burn until morning. And still, the Dauphin woke screaming Versailles was not merely a palace, it was a battlefield of whispers. Nobles who resented the Queen whispered that the Dauphin's weakness was divine punishment. Some swore the curse came from bloodlines, that the Habsburgs and Bourbons had mixed too long, and that God himself had turned against them. Others spread rumors of witchcraft, that a peasant woman, wronged by the crown, had cursed the unborn child, and in the streets of Paris, starving peasants whispered a more dangerous story, that the Dauphin's suffering was proof that the monarchy itself was dying. Doctors were summoned one after another. Some diagnosed tuberculosis, others rickets, others unnamed fevers. But one physician, Dr. Desault, the same who would later witness the boy's decline, left a chilling note. The Dauphin's malady does not behave as sickness should. It arrives suddenly, vanishes suddenly, and leaves no trace upon the body save exhaustion. It is as if something feeds upon him and then releases him. This was not a diagnosis. It was a confession of fear. So was the Dauphin cursed by witches, poisoned by rivals, or merely sick, a victim of his family's long line of illnesses? Whatever the truth, one thing became clear. The boy was growing weaker, and his visions more disturbing. And soon his curse would spread beyond the nursery, beyond the palace, and into the very heart of France, because whispers alone could not explain what came next. Political enemies began circling, the clergy grew silent, and soon the shadow of revolution would fall upon Versailles. The Dauphin was not merely sickly, he was becoming a symbol, a cursed child in a cursed kingdom. By the late 1780s, France was not merely restless, it was unraveling. The crown was drowning in debt. Bread riots ignited the streets of Paris. The whispers of revolution grew louder each week. And in Versailles, behind golden doors and glittering chandeliers, a fragile boy became the center of a storm far greater than his tiny body could withstand. To the nobles loyal to Louis XVI, the Dauphin was the last hope. He was the continuation of the Bourbon dynasty, proof that monarchy would endure. But to their enemies, he was something else entirely. Pamphlets circulated through Paris claiming the boy was cursed, that God himself had marked him as punishment for the sins of his parents. Some even claimed the Dauphin's weakness was a prophecy, that the monarchy was doomed, and that France would never again be ruled by a Bourbon king. What began as whispers in palace corridors spread to the gutters of Paris, where hungry men and women clung to rumors as truth. Inside Versailles, suspicion turned inward. Courtiers muttered about poison. The Queen had always been hated, despised as the Austrian woman. If the Dauphin died, blame would fall on her. Some believed rival factions within the nobility had arranged for slow poison to be mixed into his medicines. In fact, one servant reported seeing powders stirred into the Dauphin's milk. The Queen herself demanded his food be tasted before he touched it. But the boy still wasted away. His cough worsened, his skin grew pale as parchment, his voice faltered. If it was poison, it was a poison no one could detect, and no one could stop. The church should have been the monarchy's shield. But when priests were summoned to pray over the Dauphin, they hesitated. One priest was overheard saying, "This child is not afflicted by God, but by something we dare not name." He refused to return. Another bolder priest insisted on performing a private exorcism in the Dauphin's chambers. The Queen permitted it, but when the ritual ended, the Dauphin fell into a fit so violent that physicians feared he would die that night. When he recovered, his first words chilled the attendants. "The priest is gone now, he will not trouble me again." Days later, that very priest was dead, found collapsed in his study, his face twisted in terror. The Dauphin's frailty became political ammunition. Revolutionary pamphlets spread grotesque caricatures of the boy, tiny, sickly, mocked as a paper king. They claimed he would never survive to adulthood and that France must free itself from a dynasty already rotting from within. The more the Queen paraded her son before the public, the more the people jeered. They saw his thin body, his cough, his blank stares, and declared it proof of corruption at the heart of monarchy. The curse of the Dauphin was no longer confined to the palace. It had become a weapon, a prophecy of collapse. Years later, the historian Jules Michelet would write, "The Dauphin's illness was not merely a sickness of the body, it was the sickness of a kingdom. Every cough, every fever, every night of terror in Versailles was echoed by the cries of the starving in Paris. His curse was France's curse. The boy was no longer just a child, he was an omen. So was the Dauphin truly cursed, or was he merely a child destroyed by the weight of a kingdom collapsing around him? One thing is certain. The curse did not weaken with time, it grew stronger. Because as revolution crept closer, so too did the boy's visions, his fevers, his strange and chilling words. Soon he would speak of things no child should know, of shadows moving through his chamber at night, of faces he had never seen but somehow recognized, and the palace would begin to believe that the Dauphin was not merely cursed, but haunted. By the age of 4, the Dauphin was already more than a sickly child. He had become unsettling. Not because of what his body suffered, though the cough, the wasting limbs, the fevers still plagued him, but because of what his mind revealed. The boy spoke, and what he said left courtiers pale, priests shaken, and his mother, Marie Antoinette, more terrified than she would ever admit. Servants reported that the Dauphin sometimes spoke in full sentences while asleep. One chambermaid claimed he whispered, "The walls are cracking, the people are coming, blood will drown the gates." When she repeated this in the kitchens, rumors spread like wildfire. How could a child, barely speaking properly when awake, recite such chilling visions in the dead of night? One tutor recalled a more disturbing moment. While showing him a map of France, the Dauphin placed his tiny finger on Paris and said, "This city will eat us all. The tutor swore the child's eyes looked years older than his body. In Versailles, mirrors were everywhere, symbols of wealth, vanity, and power. But the Dauphin refused to look into them. Nannies recorded him turning his face away whenever he was carried past a gilded glass. One day, when forced to look, he screamed until blood vessels burst in his eyes. When asked why he feared mirrors, the child whispered, "Because something in them looks back, and it is not me." After that, the Queen ordered many mirrors removed from his chambers, though she gave no public explanation. Children at court often played together, but the Dauphin did not join them. Instead, he invented his own solitary games, stacking stones into towers, only to knock them down again. When asked what he was doing, he answered simply, "Building kingdoms, breaking them." One governess confessed in her journal, "I fear he takes delight not in creation, but in destruction. And though he is only a boy, I sometimes see in his smile something cruel." These words would be dismissed as exaggeration, until others began to notice the same. Marie Antoinette, already haunted by gossip, clung to her son desperately. She wrote to her sister in Austria, "He stares at me as though I am already dead. At times I do not feel like his mother, but his prisoner." Still she refused to admit her fear publicly. To the world, the Dauphin was her precious boy, heir to France, but in private she demanded priests remain nearby, candles lit at all hours, and his chamber watched constantly. It was as though she feared not what was outside his chamber, but what might come from within. Dr. Desaulles, who continued to monitor the Dauphin, grew increasingly disturbed. In one surviving note, he wrote, "There are times when the boy speaks not as a child, but as a man. His questions are not of toys or lessons, but of death, eternity, and decay. I do not know whether to treat him as a patient or to fear him as something else." Such words, coming from a physician sworn to science, reveal how deeply the Dauphin's presence unsettled even the rational mind. So was the Dauphin merely imaginative, his words twisted by fearful attendants? Or was he truly speaking glimpses of something Versailles was not ready to hear? Whatever the case, one truth remained: the palace began to fear him. And when a royal palace begins to fear its own heir, something very dark is at work. But the curse was not finished, because soon the boy's body would falter even more violently. Doctors would crowd his chamber, priests would argue in whispers, and the Queen herself would begin to wonder, not whether her son was cursed, but whether he was even human at all. The boy Dauphin had always been fragile. But by the time he turned 5, his condition no longer resembled sickness at all. It became something else, a presence, a slow unraveling of flesh, mind, and spirit that terrified even the most hardened attendants of Versailles. His cough deepened until blood speckled his handkerchiefs. His limbs grew thin, his skin so pale that courtiers whispered he looked more like marble than flesh. At night, he convulsed so violently that servants strapped him to his bed to prevent injury. Yet in the morning, he often greeted them with a faint smile and whispered, "It is not me who shakes. It is something inside me." Doctors called it consumption, the wasting sickness that claimed thousands in 18th century Europe. But even they admitted his symptoms came and went in unnatural patterns, raging one day, vanishing the next, only to return with greater fury. Versailles servants feared being assigned to his chamber. Candles were said to gutter when placed near his bed. Some swore the air in his room grew colder than the corridors outside, even in summer. One maid fainted after claiming she saw dark handprints blooming across the boy's chest, marks that vanished by morning. Another swore she heard whispering, in the Dauphin's voice, though the boy was fast asleep. By 1789, the nursery of the heir to France had become a place no one wanted to enter. Yet the Queen demanded it never be left unattended. The physicians were baffled. Some swore he was merely dying of illness. Others insisted something unnatural plagued him. The priests, meanwhile, argued bitterly. Some claimed he must be purified through blessings, others that such rituals only angered the forces surrounding him. The Queen, caught between science and faith, authorized both. Doctors bled him, leeched him, forced tonics down his throat. Priests sprinkled holy water, muttered Latin, and performed rites in secret. None of it worked. The Dauphin grew weaker. And yet, in his weakness, he seemed to gain a strange, unnerving clarity. During one examination, as physicians placed stethoscopes against his chest, the boy whispered, "You will not hear my heart. It beats in the walls now." Another time, when a priest urged him to pray, he replied calmly, "I will not pray to a God who has already abandoned me." These were not the words of a child. These were the words of someone, or something far older. Marie Antoinette, once dismissive of such superstitions, began to break beneath the strain. Letters to her confidants reveal her unraveling. "I do not know whether I am raising a king or a ghost. At times I think I love him. At times I fear him. When he looks at me, it is not as a son, but as a judge." The Queen began spending less time with her boy, delegating more to governesses. It was not neglect, it was terror. For how can a mother embrace a child who feels more spectre than son? So what truly plagued the Dauphin? Was it disease, poison, or had the crown birthed an heir who was never meant to rule? Whatever the answer, his fate would no longer remain a private torment, because soon the revolution itself would come for him. 89. The streets of Paris erupted, the Bastille fell, the monarchy trembled, and within the gilded prison of Versailles the Dauphin's curse twisted with the fury of a nation. The boy would be dragged into history's bloodiest storm, and his sickness would become inseparable from the death of a kingdom. 1789, the Kingdom of France began to crumble. On July 14th, the Bastille fell. The streets of Paris roared with hunger, rage, and vengeance, and in Versailles, behind golden gates and trembling guards, a cursed boy listened and smiled. The revolution did not wait politely at the gates. On October 5th, 1789, thousands of women marched to Versailles, demanding bread. They stormed the palace. Guards were butchered in the halls. Blood stained the marble floors where once only the soft click of silk shoes had echoed. The Queen barely escaped with her life, carried away as the mob howled for her death. And through it all, the Dauphin, only 4 years old, sat pale and coughing in his chambers. Some attendants swore he did not weep. That instead, as rioters pounded at the doors, he whispered, "They will come for me too, but not yet." The royal family was dragged from Versailles to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, a prison disguised as a residence. Here, stripped of grandeur, the Dauphin's curse had deepened. Gone were the gilded mirrors and perfumed halls. Now his chamber stank of mildew and smoke from the restless city outside. Yet his visions did not fade. He muttered about shadows at the windows, about voices in the walls, and once, when the roar of the mob filled the streets below, he told his governess calmly, "They will cut my father's head, then they will cut hers, and then they will come for me." When asked how he knew this, he only smiled as though it were already written. The revolutionaries despised the monarchy, but they were fascinated by the boy. Some called him an innocent victim, a child cursed to pay for his parents' sins. Others called him dangerous, an heir who could, if allowed to live, one day restore the monarchy. Rumors spread through Paris that the Dauphin was no mere child, but a demon born of corruption, that his weakness was an outward sign of the rot within the royal bloodline, and in whispered meetings revolutionaries debated, should the boy live, or must he die for France to be free? One prison guard, later interviewed, swore the child unnerved him more than any rioter. He would sit in the corner, watching, not crying, not laughing, just watching. And when the mobs outside screamed, he would nod as though agreeing with them. Another attendant wrote, "When I covered him with blankets, he told me not to bother. He said he would not be alive long enough to need warmth." The words of a sickly boy or the chilling prophecy of a cursed child. Marie Antoinette fought fiercely for her son. She begged for better doctors, for more time outdoors, for tutors to continue his education, but each plea was ignored. The revolutionaries had stripped her crown. Now they stripped her dignity. And with each passing day, she watched her boy waste away, not only from sickness, but from a fate darker than she could admit. One of her last letters before imprisonment reads, "I fear he is not mine any more. He belongs to death now. So what?" Was the Dauphin in those fire-soaked years a frail child caught in history's jaws, or a cursed prince who foresaw the blood that would drench France? The answer lies in what came next, because when the revolution tightened its grip, the boy would be torn from his mother's arms and left to rot in darkness. Imprisoned in the Temple Tower, the Dauphin would no longer be a prince, but a prisoner, and what happened inside those cold stone walls remains one of France's most haunting mysteries. 92. The monarchy had fallen. The king and queen were prisoners of the people, and the Dauphin, heir to the throne of France, was dragged to the Temple, a medieval fortress in the heart of Paris. From this moment on, the boy's story ceases to belong to Versailles. Now it belongs to the shadows of prison walls, and the whispers of guards who swore they saw things they could never explain. The temple was no palace. Its stone corridors echoed with dripping water, its air thick with rot and mildew. The Dauphin was confined to a cold chamber with barred windows guarded day and night. Here the curse seemed to tighten. Witnesses claimed he rarely spoke. When he did, it was not the words of a child, but the pronouncements of someone far older. One guard recorded him saying, "The tower is already my tomb. They have sealed me in before I am dead." Another swore that when he entered the cell, the boy looked at him with hollow eyes and whispered, "You will die before me. I will watch from the dark." Weeks later, that guard succumbed to sudden illness. Marie Antoinette, imprisoned with her son, clung to him desperately. But in July 1793, she was torn from the Dauphin's side. Revolutionaries feared that her influence would preserve his identity as heir. So they locked him away, alone, under the care of a jailer named Antoine Simon. The boy, already frail, seemed to wither without his mother. But attendants noted something stranger. He did not cry. Instead, he sat silently for hours, scratching symbols into the walls with bits of broken stone. Some swore the markings resembled stars, constellations, or even letters from forgotten alphabets. Others believed they were meaningless scribbles, but Simon, his jailer, grew so unsettled that he painted over the walls again and again, only for the boy to begin scratching anew. Accounts differ, but many agree. The Dauphin grew increasingly detached from reality. He refused to eat at times, insisting the food was poisoned. He claimed to hear voices at night, voices of those already dead. One Revolutionary Guard later testified, "The child told me his father's head still spoke to him. He said the king warned him not to sleep, for death was waiting behind his eyelids." Another recalled that when thunder rolled across Paris, the boy muttered, "It is the drums. They are coming for me." Even those who despised the monarchy began to fear him. For a child so frail, he inspired unease deeper than politics. In May 1795, the physician Dr. Desault was summoned once more to examine the Dauphin. His notes remain chilling. The child is wasted, pale and hollow. His pulse flickers like a candle nearly gone, and yet When he looks at me, it is not with weakness. It is with the gaze of one who knows something I cannot. Dr. Desault recommended immediate changes to his treatment. But within days, the physician himself was dead. Sudden, unexplained, poisoned perhaps, though no culprit was ever found. And so the boy was left to waste away, without allies, without comfort, without hope. Some guards confessed privately that they dreaded night duty near the boy's chamber. One swore he heard the child singing lullabies in a language he could not recognize. Another said that when he peered through the bars, the boy's face seemed wrong, older somehow, lit by shadows that did not belong to the lanterns. Perhaps it was exhaustion, perhaps guilt, but in revolutionary Paris even hardened men feared the cursed Dauphin. So what truly happened inside the temple tower? Was the Dauphin slowly dying of neglect and disease? Or was he becoming something else? Something Versailles had always feared, and Paris would never understand. The truth, if it exists, lies in the last weeks of his life, because soon the child who should have been king would begin to fade in body and spirit, and those who witnessed his final decline swore it was unlike any death they had ever seen. 1795. The boy who had once been heir to the most powerful throne in Europe was now a shadow in a locked stone chamber. The Dauphin's body had always been frail, but in his final months even his enemies admitted he no longer seemed to belong to this world at all. Witnesses described his appearance in chilling detail. His limbs were stick-thin, his cheeks hollow, his eyes sunken deep into their sockets. His cough rattled through the prison walls. His hair fell out in clumps, leaving patches of pale scalp exposed. One guard remarked, "He looked less like a child and more like a figure carved from wax, melting slowly in the heat." And yet, despite the ravages of illness, attendants swore that his eyes still carried something sharp, something watchful, as though the boy saw everything around him with terrible clarity. Even in decline, the Dauphin's words disturbed those who heard them. To one physician he said, "You cannot cure what is not illness. You bleed me, you poison me, but the curse feeds itself." To a guard, he whispered, "Do not touch me. Death already sits beside me." And on one particularly stormy night, when thunder shook the stones of the temple, he told his governess, "It is not thunder. It is drums. They are marching for me." The woman fled the cell in tears. Rumors spread that the boy's body bore marks no doctor could explain. Some claimed bruises appeared on his chest in the shape of hands. Others swore scars etched themselves along his arms as though clawed by something invisible. One attendant even whispered that his shadow no longer matched his body, that when lanterns flickered, the boy's shadow stretched unnaturally long, moving a fraction too late. Such accounts were dismissed as hysteria, but they lingered, feeding the myth that the Dauphin was more than just sick, he was cursed. Anyone who tried to intervene seemed to meet misfortune. Dr. Desault, the physician most sympathetic to him, died suddenly after urging better care. Another attendant fell from the tower steps to her death, and a jailer who confessed pity for the boy was dismissed abruptly, never heard from again. It was as if the curse spread beyond the boy, devouring those who dared to show kindness. In June of 1795, the Dauphin's decline accelerated. He stopped eating, claiming food turned to ash in his mouth. His voice weakened to a whisper. On the final day of his life, he reportedly told a guard, "The crown is broken. France has no king. But still, I will wait for my throne." Hours later, he collapsed in bed. Witnesses swore he smiled faintly just before the end. At the age of 10, the Dauphin was dead, or so the official record claimed. An autopsy was performed, and doctors recorded signs of scrofular tuberculosis of the lymph nodes. They noted his frail, wasted body, the swollen glands, the lesions, and yet the body was not buried immediately. Instead, his heart was removed and preserved in a crystal vial kept by a royalist doctor. Why? Because even in death, many refused to believe the boy was truly gone. Some claimed the corpse in the temple was not the Dauphin at all, but another child substituted to hide the truth. The preserved heart became a relic, a grim token of a life cut short and a curse never lifted. So, was the boy's death natural?
Or was it the final act of a curse that haunted him from the cradle? The revolution buried his body, but not the questions. Because soon, rumors would spread that the Dauphin had not died in that tower at all. Impostors would rise, claimants would
Swear they were the lost Prince of France. And Europe itself would wonder, did the boy die cursed and alone, or did the true Dauphin escape his prison, leaving behind only a ghost? The official story is simple. June 8, 1795, Louis-Joseph, the Dauphin of France, died in the Temple Tower. But history is rarely simple, and the death of the cursed Dauphin became one of Europe's most enduring mysteries. From the moment the news spread, whispers of doubt followed. Some guards claimed the body did not look like the boy they had watched waste away. Others swore the corpse was too tall, too healthy, too different. The revolution, eager to close the matter, rushed to announce the child's death. But to royalists it was too convenient. For them, the question was not if the Dauphin had died, but where he had gone. Over the following decades, Europe was flooded with men claiming to be the lost Dauphin. They appeared in France, in Germany, even in America. Some had scars, some had strange knowledge of Versailles, others carried letters, supposedly smuggled from the temple. At least 30 men declared themselves the true heir to France. Most were frauds, seeking wealth or fame. But a few were so convincing that even hardened skeptics hesitated. One, Charles Naundorff of Berlin, lived for years insisting he was the Dauphin. He knew details of Versailles life no outsider should. He bore a striking resemblance to Marie Antoinette, and on his deathbed in 1845 he declared, "I am the son of Louis XVI and France will one day know it." Royalist conspiracies took root. Some claimed loyalists smuggled the boy out of the temple in a laundry basket, replacing him with a sickly orphan who later died in his place. Others believed foreign agents spirited him away, intending to use him as a political pawn when the monarchy might be restored. There were even darker rumors that priests or alchemists, fearing his curse, took him into hiding for purposes no one dared to write down. Each theory contradicted the other, yet none could be disproven entirely. Perhaps the most chilling relic of all was the heart. During the autopsy, Dr. Philippe Jean Pelletan secretly removed the boy's heart and preserved it in a crystal vial. He claimed he could not bear to let the child vanish completely. The heart passed through many hands, hidden, stolen, lost, rediscovered. In 1975, it was placed in the Basilica of Saint-Denis, the resting place of France's kings, and in 2000, DNA testing confirmed the preserved heart did belong to a child of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. But even this solved nothing, because it did not prove the body in the temple was the same child. It proved only that somewhere, at some time, the heart of a royal child had been preserved. The curse lived on. For revolutionaries, the Dauphin's death was the end of monarchy's symbol. For royalists, it was proof of betrayal, of secrets buried beneath lies, and for the people of France, it became a ghost story, a tale of a boy born into a golden cage, consumed by sickness, whispers, and shadows, only to vanish into history's fog. So what truly happened to the boy king who never ruled? Did he die a frail, cursed child
in a stone cell?
Or did he escape, living on in exile, hidden by those who feared what he might become? Even today, the question divides historians and haunts France. But perhaps the more terrifying truth is not whether the Dauphin lived or died. It is the legacy, his curse left behind. Because even now, more than 2 centuries later, his story is remembered not as history, but as a warning. The Dauphin's short life ended more than 2 centuries ago, and yet, even now, his shadow lingers. Not as a prince, not as a king, but as a curse. To some historians, the Dauphin was never a mystery. He was a sickly child, crushed by tuberculosis, neglected in prison, and buried quietly by a revolution too busy with blood to notice. But to others, he was a mirror of his kingdom. France itself wasted away in the 1780s and 1790s, its body frail from famine, its heart rotting with corruption, its people coughing blood into the cobblestones of Paris. The boy did not merely die. He embodied a monarchy in decay, as one chronicler wrote. In the death of the child, the kingdom itself was interred. Even after his supposed death, the Dauphin's curse seemed to echo. France endured decades of turmoil, executions, wars, the
rise and fall of Napoleon, the restoration of monarchies that never truly healed. Each time a crown was placed upon a French head, whispers returned. The Dauphin had been cursed, and that curse had not yet lifted. And in quiet taverns, in shadowed streets,
the story was told again and again. A boy born with eyes too old, who spoke words too dark, and who never escaped the prison of his fate. Even the heart, preserved in crystal, carries the echo of the curse. Pilgrims came to see it. Royalists wept before it. Scientists tested it. And yet it is not merely an organ. It is a symbol of obsession, the need to believe the boy's death was not natural, that it carried something darker, something unspeakable. One historian described, standing before the vial and feeling a chill so sharp it froze him in place. I looked at it, he confessed, and I felt as though the boy was still watching me. But perhaps the true terror lies not in whether the boy lived or died, cursed or diseased. The terror lies in what he reveals about us, that we, across centuries, cannot let go of his story, that we need to believe he was cursed because it is easier than admitting he was simply a child, destroyed by neglect, cruelty, and indifference, that sometimes the monsters are not born cursed, but made by the world that should have protected them. So was the Dauphin cursed, or was he simply the final victim of a monarchy devouring itself? The truth may never be known, but the boy who never sat on the throne remains one of France's darkest
mysteries, his life a tragedy, his death a riddle, his legacy
a curse. And now I ask you, what do you believe? Did the boy die in that tower, sick and broken, or did he escape, vanishing into the shadows of history? Tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. And if you want more shadows from the past, more stories history tried to bury, subscribe to Cold Mysteries, because every week we bring you another door that was never meant to be opened, and not all doors should be.